Oh, hello, everyone. For many years, we simplified heart disease down to one thing: high LDL cholesterol. But plaque formation is much more than that. LDL is part of it, but it's not the entire story. So the question is no longer just what is my LDL level? The bigger question is what is happening inside my artery walls? What is my inflammation level? What is my plaque status? And most certainly, what's driving this plaque accumulation? So, according to the CDC, more than 500,000 Americans die from heart attacks and strokes every year. Now, many of these people had regular checkups, and most of them were told everything looks fine, everything looks normal. Now, they're told everything looks fine because today's screening does not look at what drives plaque buildup, and it often misses early signs. So in this video, by the end of this video, you will learn the difference between stenosis. Stenosis is the narrowing of the arteries. So we will learn the difference between stenosis, stable calcified plaque, and unstable soft plaque. How cardiovascular plaque develops and progresses. How CAC and CCTA imaging improve early cardiovascular risk detection. The limitations of today's cardiovascular screening. And last, I'm going to introduce a new cardiovascular assessment web tool that not only evaluates risk, but also provides preventive strategies. So we're starting with the first case, stenosis. What is stenosis? Stenosis means the narrowing of the arteries caused by plaque buildup. Now, as this narrowing becomes more severe, blood flow becomes more restricted, and this reduces oxygen delivery, which means high risk of heart attacks or strokes. So even endurance athletes can develop stenosis. High fitness levels do not make someone immune to plaque buildup. And in many cases, athletes may continue performing well for years before symptoms such as shortness of breath or decline in performance begin to appear. So this is why imaging becomes extremely important, because two people can have the same degree of narrowing, but very different plaque stability, and hence very different cardiovascular risk. And we're going to see more of this in the next slide. So before we dive into this, we need to mention that there are two major CT scans used in cardiovascular screening. One is CAC scan, and the other is CCTA scan. A CAC scan measures the amount of calcified plaque in the arteries, and it gives what's called calcium score. Now, this calcium score helps estimate the overall plaque burden in the arteries. A CCTA, on the other hand, goes further, and it provides more information. It can show us the degree of stenosis, and it can also identify the type of plaque. Is it stable calcified plaque, or is it high-risk soft, unstable, non-calcified soft plaque? So this image here is a chunk of an artery, and it shows us what's going on. Looking, starting from the left here. As you can see in yellow, these are a representation of lipid particles or ApoB particles. And these ApoB particles, they slip through the artery wall and they become oxidized and they trigger inflammation. Now, the first question that comes to mind, why do we have a security breach here in the inner lining of the artery? And why are these ApoB particles slipping through? Well, two things that comes to mind. One is what's called advanced glycation end product. And this is caused when we have excessive amount of glucose in the arteries, and they end up binding to the protein part of the inner lining. And this glycation, this sugar or glucose binding to protein, end up eroding and making this inner lining more permeable to these ApoB. So the security breach can come from a high sugar diet or high carb or high refined carb diet, and chronically you have high glucose in your bloodstream, and if it's not managed and controlled, we can possibly introduce this inner lining permeability. So the second thing that comes to mind is high blood pressure. And high blood pressure causes stretching to the inner lining. And over time, this stretching causes a gap in between cells, and hence you have these ApoB slipping through. Okay? So the body, once these ApoB accumulates inside and get oxidized and trigger inflammation, the body needs to contain it. And it does that by building a protective layer around the plaque. Now, this protective layer is called the fibrous cap, as you can see here. And it is made of collagen. Now, the second thing that happens is calcium is deposited into the plaque. And it is almost like the body is cementing over this dangerous area. Now, this makes the plaque harder and more stable, which causes inflammation to go down. And because inflammation is down, it is less likely to keep expanding and keep putting pressure on this protective layer, the fibrous cap. And therefore, it is less likely to rupture. And this is why it's called stable plaque. It is contained, and the fibrous cap is solid and thicker, and it is less likely to rupture. Now, let's look at the second case, which is the worst case scenario here. And this is what typically causes heart attacks and strokes. So it's very important to go step by step so we can understand everything. So first thing to note, arteries do not suddenly clog overnight. This is a gradual process. And it starts on the left here. As previously, these ApoB lipid particles slip through the artery wall and become trapped underneath. As you can see here. Now, over time, these lipid particles become oxidized, which means we need an immune response. So the body sends immune cells called macrophages to clean this mess up. Now, these macrophages engulf these oxidized particles, or they eat this oxidized particle. But in doing so, they cannot process all of them. They cannot process them fully. So these macrophages become what's called enlarged foam cells. So these foam cells are problematic, and they're problematic for two reasons. One, they keep releasing inflammatory cytokines and chemicals. And this inflammatory cytokines and chemicals keeps calling for more immune cells to arrive to the area. So it's a vicious circle. So the second thing they do is they release a problematic enzyme called MMPs, or matrix metalloproteinase. Now, this is problematic because this MMP weakens, it attacks and weakens the collagen part of the fibrous cap. So they keep attacking it till they thin it out, and it becomes weaker, and it will eventually burst and give up and rupture. And when this happens, the plaque spills into the bloodstream and it triggers a clot, which leads to a heart attack or a stroke in a matter of seconds, if not minutes. So the lesson here is not just how much plaque you have, it's what kind of plaque you have. Now think of it as calcified plaque is more like a tire. It's harder, firmer, and usually less likely to explode. Non-calcified soft plaque, like such as this here in front of us, more like a balloon. It has thin surface and more likely to burst and tear under pressure. So this is a very important point. Okay. So this slide here is more of a summary slide. So what do we need to do? If you are over the age of 40, These are the labs that we need to get. We need to most certainly get ApoB. We need to get Lp(a). We need to get inflammatory lab markers such as interleukin-6 and hsCRP. We can't just get fasting glucose. We need fasting insulin so we can measure IR or insulin resistance. And we need homocysteine. Homocysteine means, the reason why homocysteine is here is because homocysteine is another one of those that if it's high, it will cause us permeability to the inner lining of the artery wall. So it's very important to assess it. Now, if these labs turn out to be elevated, all right, we need to move to step 3, which is CAC score. If this CAC score turn out to be higher than 100, all right, then the next step is get the CCTA. The CCTA will give us two things. It will show us the how much narrowing do we have, stenosis, the percentage of narrowing. And the second thing, it will give us the either is it a high risk, or is it a non-calcified high risk, or is it a low risk plaque? All right. So this is very important here. This is, you can screenshot this, and this is the path to assessing, getting a full assessment of your artery walls of the cardiovascular risk, all right, without missing anything out. Now, I'm going to introduce this new tool that actually assesses the risk and provides therapeutic strategies. So let's take a case study. Let's say we have a 55-year-old female, and let's say she's going to do just the standard screening. All right, we're not going to do ApoB or any of that or inflammatory marker. We're going to do our physical, and we're going to do our screening, and we want to see what the assessment is, and then we're going to do the more elaborate screening, and we'll compare the two. So waist circumference, let's say she's got 36. She's 60 inches tall, 155. High blood pressure is okay. And in the standard screening, they're only going to check for cholesterol, total cholesterol. Then they're going to do LDL. Let's say it turns out to be 126. And HDL, it turns out to be 84. Triglyceride 123, and then they're going to do fasting glucose. And if you ask for HbA1c, they may not do it 5. Let's say they do it 5.5, and then they're gonna do some hepatic. They're gonna do TSH. Okay, let's say it comes down to 2. Some hepatic. This is part of the liver enzymes. And definitely no CAC, no CCTA. No, we don't know anything about the genetics. And then the family history and lifestyle, no major. We're going to do moderate sleep, physical activity, light activity, and high blood pressure, high processed diet. We're going to do mixed diet, sleep, moderate, and smoking, no alcohol, no. And let's calculate the risk. All right, so we are doing just the standard screening as it stands today. All right, now calculate the risk. Okay, so the risk will come out to be low pattern burden, green. It will send you home. Nothing is wrong with you. Keep doing what you're doing. All right, so let's say we want to do an elaborate test. This is not enough. This female is of age 55, and she needs to do more tests. ApoB, 118. We need to do fasting insulin, 18. Okay. We need to do inflammatory markers. Let's say 12, and here is, let's say this one is 2. 12 is too much. Okay. No, none of this, not yet. No CAC, just more labs. Okay. And we're going to keep the family history as is. Now calculate the risk. Now this individual is high pattern. This individual is high risk. Okay. We went from green to red just because we tested ApoB and inflammatory markers and fasting insulin. That's the only thing we added. And this person, risk is high risk, all right? And because this person is high risk now they need to do a CAC score, all right? So CAC score turns out to be, let's say, 105. Because it's 105, they need to do plaque severity. They need to do CCTA. And the CCTA turned out to be moderate, all right? So let's see what happens now. Let's recalculate the risk. Now, this person is actually very high pattern burden, all right? This person needs an intervention right away, all right? So keep in mind, we went from green, keep doing what you're doing, everything looks fine, to very high pattern burden. Okay, and the reason for that is because insulin resistant, high lipid particles, and inflammatory markers. Okay, so these are the target goals. So this tools not only it gives you the risk here, but it also tells you what you need to reduce. Okay, and then it gives you a nutrition recommendation based on those results. The tool does that automatically. And then it gives you targeted supplementation to lower your ApoB and to increase your insulin sensitivity to reduce the inflammation. And these are the follow-up, all right? You need to follow up in 8 to 12 weeks, and this is where you need to retest, okay? So it's very important to follow this to get the right labs so you can follow the protocol going from, if your labs are high, then you need to do a CAC score. If your CAC score, then you need to follow up with CCTA. Okay? And that's all I have for this tool here. These are the references. This is where all this stuff came from. Okay? And thank you so much and have a good day.